All right, and now for our next session of Soiree 2024. William, take it away.
Okay, welcome to the 3 p.m. Eastern Time or 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time session of Soiree. This session is titled Cultivating Creativity and Neurodiversity. We have two presentations, and we're going to have each the two presentations go, and then after both presentations complete, we will open the floor for conversation, questions, and discussions. We have 50 minutes in the schedule, and I anticipate lots of time available for questions and discussions afterwards. The first presentation will be by Mayet, Andreassen, Jinsel Sa, Caleb, and Emily from Texas A&M University in the United States.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Is there a way to share our presentation?
You should be able to share screen. Do you have the share screen button available?
I do have the share screen button, and that's what we will do. There we go. All right. Hopefully everybody can see.
That's great.
Excellent. So, hi, my name is Mayet Andreassen, and I'm Associate Program Director for the BS in Visualization at Texas A&M University, an Instructional Assistant Professor. My background is in animation and game development. Dr. Steele.
Hello, I'm an associate professor in the School of Performance Visualization and Fine Arts. I'm also directing the Institute for Applied Creativity.
Howdy, everyone. My name is Caleb Hickletter. I'm an instructional assistant professor in visualization, and I teach primarily 3D animation field-related courses.
And Emily Bujnak could not be with us today because she is teaching, and she is an instructional assistant professor in our program as well. So we did some research in terms of implementing AI into the classroom. So we have an internal grant to explore AI and creativity in the classroom. And we split this up into several sections. We did the research, so students needed to research different AI tools. Then they needed to implement that tool in some way in their projects that they were working on. And they also needed to document what they learned, what the results of the tool were, whether they modified the tool, and what were the pros and cons of using it. My class created an interactive environment or game. My class also created a companion app, a phone companion app for their environment or game. And they were required to use one AI tool in some way, shape, or form on their projects. And as I mentioned, they had to describe what the tool was, how they used it, showed examples of the output. If they modified the output, what did that look like? And whether it was an effective tool or not. Other classes created short animations, and so they used tools in different ways. Some of the results in terms of my class, most teams used ChatGPT. They generated dialogue, name ideas, fact blurbs, and some of them used it for coding. Other teams used the tools to create background imagery for their games or environments, or to generate ideas for designs as a jumping off point. And one of the teams was called Greenbots. They used Stable Diffusion, and they generated background imagery for their game. And when I say background imagery, they used it as like HDRI imagery. So it's like really background. They said the tool was really easy to use. There were changes that had to be made to prompts to get the results that they wanted. And they said the images were really small, so they considered using Photoshop AI tools to extend their images. And here is the image from Stable Diffusion, you can see, and then a still from in-game. So they just used it as kind of the sky and the background in their game. The next team, Team Mimo Productions, they use ChatGPT to generate fact write-ups for their interactive environment. They said the AI was given a fact or statistic and prompted to use it to write something engaging. But the pros and cons were it worked well, but it often restated things with only slight difference. So there was a lot of redundancy. They ended up having to modify all of the ChatGPT related blurbs because they said the initial output was way too long. And there was a lot of unnecessary wording that needed to be cut out. The team also found that they had to add context to their final output. They said ChatGPT was easy to use and it does give really fast results. And here's just a screenshot of what they turned in terms of their research. So they said, here's the fact. We're going to give it to ChatGPT and here's the output. And then here it is in game, what they ended up having in the end. And the last team that I believe I'm going to be talking about, Team Cosmic Corrections, also used ChatGPT to come up with ideas for their character's name. They used DALL-E 3 and Firefly 2.0 to come up with ideas for 2D assets within their game. They also used Bing's AI text to image generator to create the look and feel of their UI layout. They found that they could collect specific reference material really quickly using these tools, and that allowed them to focus on creating assets that matched the look and feel of their game. So they had more time on their actual projects. And the cons were they felt like AI can only go so far with ideation. A lot of time images were distorted, and they felt like text to image would be best used for ideation purposes in a pre-production phase, but that it does have an easy learning curve. And then here's some of the image outputs that they had initially, and then things that they modified and put in game. And this was their final UI for their game. All right.
Cool. All right. Thank you, Mayet. I'll talk a little bit about how it was used in our group animation course last semester. Just as a background for the course, it is a course where we have sophomores, juniors, and seniors working together on group projects. And their task on a team of 6 to 7 people is to create an animated short film that is 20 to 30 seconds long, all created completely in 3D, whether it's using Unreal Engine or Pixar's RenderMan as the final rendering output for the final image sequence. So the task for our class was very similar, where we told this class that, hey, we want you guys, the main goal of this semester is for you guys to, in the use of AI, is to explore the use of AI and what's out there. We didn't have specifics on here's exactly the tools you should use, here's the workflows you should use. We just kind of covered some use cases and suggestions, and then expected the students to do some research and come back at the end of the semester and tell us what their experience was like, much like Mayet's was. So in this case, this is a good example of how it was actually primarily used in our teaching method, which was providing some essentially feedback for the students. So much like one of the examples that Mayet was giving, that a lot of students used it in the ideation phase. And one of the reasons why this was so useful is in our program, students have such a limited kind of curriculum for certain disciplines. So one of those is like concept development and visual development. So in a lot of cases, it's very helpful to have those text images generators like DALL-E or even Adobe's generative fill and generative image in Firefly is really helpful to help the teams kind of curtail that design ideation phase so they can get some kind of initial visual progress to build off of. So that was kind of one of the main uses of it. But in this case, this was a kind of a novel use where we treated some of the AI generators as almost someone giving feedback, or also almost someone doing draw overs, right? So in a lot of cases when we were kind of stuck, or we didn't know how to talk about something, or we were having a hard time visualizing what the image would look like, what students or the teachers would do is we would take their renders or their sketches or their drawings, upload it to an image generator with some prompts, and then get back some kind of prediction of what it could look like in the future. And it was important for us to kind of treat this as if this is just another suggestion, right? This isn't a target. This isn't a goal that they have to hit. It's not always right. It's not always going to have the best ideas. But the main kind of concept there was it was another part of the feedback process where students would get a visual idea of where they're going, what their stuff could look like. And it was especially helpful for students who had to communicate between one student to another student of what they had in mind, right? We try to encourage them to come up with like great references as best they can to visualize their artwork or their ideas through drawings, through finding stills from existing films and movies. But in some cases, it was really hard for them to articulate, like, you know, I'm thinking this environment's going to look like this and it's going to have that. And, you know, what someone describes out loud shows up in someone else's head as completely different images without us realizing it. So this was really helpful for people to have something on paper to point at and be like, yes, this right here is what I was thinking, or no, not quite like that. This would actually be larger, or this would be green. So here's one example of that kind of concept. Could you go to the next slide, please? Here's like a later development. So you can see on the left-hand side, that's like later in the semester once they've had more updated models and surfacing. And again, they're doing the same thing. They were working on the lighting. They were kind of struggling a little bit. We talked a lot about the intention behind their lighting. And so we pushed it again back into using an image generator to kind of give them some ideas of how to like highlight that composition. So you're pulling all of your attention to the center of that frame. And, you know, you'll notice in the left-hand image, the image is a bit flat, especially in terms of lighting and focus. But of the images on the right-hand side, there is like a sense of focus based on, you know, how this text-to-image generator was trained off of. Could you go to the next slide, please? And then this image is a little washed out due to color spaces, but this is kind of a bit like how the final image looked from the team. Could you go to the next slide, please? All right, here's another team. Again, this was used in a lighting purpose where at one point they showed lighting progress in Unreal, sort of a previs layout scene, right? They have their updated character, but he's, you know, walking around in T-pose, and they're just trying to figure out how the lighting's going to work in this environment they constructed. And so, you know, we used their image, fed it into the image generator, and had like essentially a cinematic film look that we were looking at or aiming for to give the students direction on like, okay, what's working in these images, or what might be working in these images, and what isn't working in yours, and like how are they different? It gave students comparative, more close to their work that's easy to kind of have to-do lists or a task to accomplish. Next slide, please. And here's kind of like a comped final image that they had later on from their short film. Next slide, please. Here's another one. This one was interesting because it gave them a lot of ideas cinematically or from a camera perspective of how they can go for that miniature look. So they were going for like a miniature train set kind of feel, like it's like a little diorama. And so this gave us a lot of interesting ideas when we first kind of generated these series of images, because it kind of like the instinct was to go for like almost a Lincoln Logs or Playmobil or Lego kind of look. But we could tell just from this in terms of scale of assets and also what the camera was doing, how we could reinforce that stylized small world look in unconventional ways, right? So these feel like kind of like almost like what you would see in like a display at like a store or something like that. And then there's some interesting things in the top, particularly in the top right one, of what was going on with the background that had like sort of like a designed layered backdrop effect, like almost like it has like a background painting and like a little 3D, a little dimensional model there. But it had like a really nice cohesive look. So it gave them a lot of really interesting ideas. Next slide, please. And then here's like a later render that they had towards the end. That was a lot of information was based off of those images that they generated. But you'll notice probably from a lot of these is they don't quite look like their images. One is like because I think executing some of those images is very challenging, right? There's a lot of information that's done in those image generations that's, you know, assuming a lot of abilities and controls that students could have. But in a lot of ways, it's sort of just they take the things they like from it, and it gives them new ideas or directions to start investigating and looking into. So you can see this is very different than those examples, but definitely gave them things to build off of. Next slide, please. Here's another kind of visual example. So like there in our class, we have this like a milestone vertical slice checkpoint system, right? Where about 3 different times throughout the semester, students have to bring all their pieces together, all of their characters, all their models, all their lighting, whatever's done, put it together and see how their project's looking. And so you can see this is like after like, I think week 4, week 5, right? Where the students are throwing together whatever they have in their layout, whatever they have in the modeling progress on their heroes, and just smack it together to see what they have. And then if you go to the next slide, please. So we fed, again, it's the same concept. We took that image, we fed it into the generators, and we started coming up with visual examples of like, how can we take this from flat grayscale renders and hit a certain filmic look, or something that's more cinematic. And so these are stills from not the end, right? Because that bottom right one's not from the end. We saw that frame earlier, but you can kind of see how, could you go back one and then go forward again, please? Thank you. So you can kind of see how that gave them a lot of ideas in terms of color, lighting, composition, and especially in terms of compositing and lighting and color, right? Like especially that I'm sorry, Mayet, to do this, but can you go back one more? So you can see in that top right one, right? Like they're going for this like under the lake kind of murky feeling to it. And so by generating that with their models, they can see like, oh, like this particulate matter, we might want to create this with like a fog or some kind of volume. What can we get away with doing this in compositing, or what can, like, especially in terms of the color correction, what can we get away with doing as like a background painting? So this just really helped them have something to talk about and converge around. And especially when they're communicating with the professors, when they have challenges with articulating their ideas, because a lot of them are still learning and a lot of them are still new to a lot of these concepts in terms of film and games. But I believe that's the last slide, correct? Okay, cool. So that's all that I wanted to say about that class. So does that mean we're opening it up to questions, Matt?
Jinsil, well,
okay, sorry.
Go to Jinsil.
Yeah, then I think the last comment I'd like to provide is, we collected like survey and then the post-survey data. And the students initially a little bit skeptical about, using AI in their creative processes. But, later, they found, like the AI is a supportive tools, and then also they see the value in the visualization and then effectiveness of using AI. But also in our classes, we emphasized, ethical considerations using AI in the classroom in their creative processes. So students, became more like knowledgeable, and then how to use and how to, choose certain tools and how to iterate the processes and all of those. So hopefully, we continue these practices in our classrooms. Students learn more about, like how these tools in their creative processes, and then create a better works, and then collaborate better with other teams. And also as instructors, we also learn from these processes and apply and improve our learning materials to students every single year. I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mayet, Caleb, and Jinsil. Next, we have Nandini Giri from Purdue University, who will give the next presentation.
Yeah, thank you, William. And let me share my screen. Okay. Good. I hope you can see it now. Yeah.
Looks good.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Nandini Giri from Purdue University, and today I'll be talking about a project that kind of started in one of my classes through ideations and thinking about what is the future applications of VR And we kind of narrowed down into VR tourism. And this led into thinking more about who are the different audiences that we can speak to. And over a period of 3 semesters now, it's kind of taken from a coursework to becoming more of a research project going on in my lab. So this is about prototyping a pre-departure training module using VR technologies for students who are going on study abroad experiences. So to start off, talking about study abroad programs, I'm sure every college, every university have these opportunities where students in the United States, they have these summer options or spring break options of being able to move to different destinations, partner institutions, and be able to collaborate with other students, be into this cultural immersion. And the main objectives here are really about intercultural competencies and being able to look at worldviews from different perspectives. And we also find it very useful when students take these study abroad trips, because then they kind of get to understand the global workflows, workforce, and what are the different professional ethics being followed across the world. So study abroad experiences are something that everyone are kind of looking at. So thinking about these advantages, what are the other sides, like what are some challenges that students face when they enroll for these programs? One of the main problems comes in terms of the anxiety, in terms of how do you pre-plan for a foreign destination, or once you're in that space, you're just given a week or 2 weeks time to be able to really immerse yourself in this whole place. So ultimately, it ends up in being more of a chaotic situation where students are facing more fatigue. So what we did is we recruited around 6 students who've already been to study abroad destinations, who've kind of part of the mailing list and kind of ambassadors or mentors for upcoming students enrolled, and asked them to attend a session in Google Earth VR. They were invited to our lab, and this was more a think aloud protocol where students were asked to, first just familiarize themselves with the VR technology, be able to use the controllers, and then started asking them some questions, guiding them, like what was the destination that you've been to? Can you take us through different landmarks? If you can talk about some of your experiences there, what are the memories? So just making them really relive those study abroad experiences. And once it was done, they were given a questionnaire to fill out about the efficiency of using VR technologies for study abroad programs, thinking about ways that they feel these technologies can be useful to them, and also some of the challenges they face in being able to use VR technology. So students were really excited to be going to these places in Google Earth VR. They said, like some of them, oh, I couldn't go to this museum because I don't know, like maybe it was closed, or they couldn't go to this open space because it was raining. So they were really happy to be able to use VR technologies to kind of revisit those places. But as you see here, they also mentioned like how there was a lack of cultural interaction with the locals. And this is something they suggested could actually be included in a pre-departure orientation. And there was a need to understand local values and be able to interact with real people. There was also suggestions to perform cultural tasks that could educate users about the local culture. So from their responses, what we found is that, yes, the technology is exciting. There's the novelty of being able to just fly around and zoom in, but something that's more unique, something that helps them to understand the cultural nuances will really help them be more prepared and also reduce their anxiety levels when going to these foreign destinations. So with this pilot study, the current phase that we are in right now is we are using the Kolb's learning framework that goes through these 4 levels of learning activities. So starting with the experiential level, where students who are probably taking this pre-departure module could be able to experience some of those cultural nuances through VR technologies, and then providing ways for them to be able to reflect over these different value differences, question their own practices, see how this can change their worldviews, and then be able to generalize it into their own gaming or animation practices, and then being able to apply it in their professional work. So here is the current state of our VR prototype. It's called Studio Hyderabadi. So this is a study abroad program that I'll be offering in summer of 2024, where we are going to India and visiting some of the gaming animation studios. And we are also planning to partner with a couple of institutions there for some collaborative projects. So this prototype has 4 different scenarios, and each one is based on the Kolb's experiential learning framework, where it's about experimenting with a certain task and then having the time to reflect and then thinking about how it can be applied in their own work. So I'll just go through the quickly 4 different scenarios. I just have screenshots here, but the first one is really about looking at some of the tangible, intangible elements of culture that comes into the workplace. So as you see here, there's some symbols of religion, the gestures that people use in a foreign country, and then asking questions about what did you notice there in these spaces? What are the cultural artifacts that are really integrated into this professional game studio that is quite different from what you've been kind of accustomed to thinking about the professional world? The next one is really about working with some of the people in this studio. So there are some virtual agents, and here is an intern who is assumed to be from India. So the intern talks about student life in India, how it feels about gaming and animation education there, and then asking questions like, so how is it, having an education at Purdue, and talking about some of the kind of differences, similarities, and sharing the passion. Then we move on to a creative dailies, where there is this art supervisor talking about a natural, what do you call it? A national heritage. It's a Golconda Fort. This is one of the destinations in Hyderabad. So then students will be sent to a link where they actually explore a panoramic view of the fort and be given the tasks of sketching these cultural spots and being able to appreciate, critique the different textures and architecture over there. And finally, this is kind of the fun part, talking about the local festivities, the cuisine. It's like New Year celebrations in the studio. So how people bring in the local narratives and celebrations into workplace, and having our students kind of looking at, okay, so, it's not like they're overwhelmed with all this information, but it's more an exploratory VR tour where they really go through this whole gaming studio in India and be able to virtually interact with these cultural ambassadors, but also being guided later on to kind of reflect, ask the right questions, and through focus groups, really bringing out our students' own frameworks and kind of challenging them with these alternate paths. So with that, I'll stop there and maybe explain more during the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Nandini. Okay, we're going to open up the question, answer, and discussion period. So I'm going to pause for a moment to let folks think of some questions to share in either chat or the Q&A window.
I'm going to use my unfair advantage about being able to turn my camera and microphone on, but I'll go away. But I just wanted to say that both of these presentations are transformative for the students. I feel like, leveraging VR for students that are on various neurodiversity spectrums and being able to adapt and socialize is phenomenal. And also, I am someone who has So I have neurodiversity of my own, so I'm just like thrilled for these students. But I'm also someone who struggles with drawing. I just, you know, and that had long been an obstacle or a challenge for me in conceptualizing digital work going forward. And so I just absolutely love this leveraging of AI to conceptualize ideas and then translate them into the 3D graphics. And so I'm wondering from both groups here, in terms of the sets of presenters, what is the what have your students been sharing back as, in terms of how they feel this has impacted their experience within your classes, in their educational programs? And then I'll yield the floor. Thanks.
I guess real quick for my class, they liked that it sped up their workflow. They did find though in some of like trying to use it for code and stuff like that, they found that it was just easier for them to do the coding themselves, but they did like how it sped up the iterative process. Caleb?
I think comparison I would use is like the fear of a blank page kind of concept. I think in different stages of the project where students didn't have something to kind of like I gave an example for earlier, talk about or kind of build off of. We'd always encourage them to first start from the real world and start from their own ideas, their own concepts, their own drawings. But to some degree, there's I think sometimes a barrier or bridge where they can't see where they can go from their initial idea or their initial concepts to an expanded or different direction, right? They're often can only work with what they're familiar with and what they can maybe technically create themselves, right? Like if they have experience drawing people. So in a lot of ways, I think as a lot of people are aware that a lot of these generative AI tools they can give very unexpected results. And they're also very limited based on the models they're trained and how you use the prompts. But I think that tended to help students as well of just create ideas or looks or directions, whether by accident or intentionally, that they couldn't have been able to stumble upon themselves without going through a serious kind of longer term feedback loop. But yeah, I definitely think that the short term iteration, that being able to create something, feed it back in, make an update, feed it back in, I think gave them a speed boost to their project. But yeah, I definitely had a lot of students who were, there's just as many students who created something with an AI tool or especially generative AI where they're just I wasn't happy with that, or this tool seems to keep giving me the same thing, and that's not what I want. I don't know how to get past that. So we definitely did have it as it wasn't a universal everybody was I can't live without these, but I think everybody saw that as this is a thing I'm going to try, just like going onto Google and searching for images, and I might get the results I want, or I might have to go another result and find something.
Okay. Thank you, Caleb. There's a question in chat from Richard Thompson. Richard Thompson says, these were both super presentations. Thank you, Texas A&M team. What were the specific concerns students had in terms of using AI in their work?
Yeah, I can really quickly speak to my class, but I think a lot of our students were we tried to get a lot of the information from students first about what they already thought about AI before we kind of gave them our opinions. But from the get-go, I think a surprising portion of students were already aware of the ethical concerns of the tools being used to replace labor, replace jobs, and tools being trained off of people's work, right? Which a lot of the tools that even some of the students were using have been accused of, right? And that's some of the most popular tools out there. And so that was, I think, one of the exercises for the semester that was useful was students navigating and coming to terms with what their personal opinions on with adequate and appropriate use of these tools. And that's where a lot of students set from the very beginning. We talked, each team, we encouraged them to talk amongst their teams about what their rules were going to be. And I think almost every single team made the decision that none of our final imagery, nothing that's going to be visually seen in our project should be a result of one of these generative AI tools. There's other tools like AI upscalers or, a substance sampler, right, which people did use and got the final results from, but those weren't necessarily building images trained off of a database of other people's artwork. So that was definitely a concern for a lot of our students, was how that was impacting artists, because a lot of our students are very connected online through social media to young artists, young professionals out there who are speaking up about how AI is being inappropriately used. Yeah, that was definitely probably one of the biggest concerns I think a lot of students vocalized.
Thank you, Caleb.
One
Richard.
thing,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
sorry, one thing I'd like to share is I think there is no determined best practice, using AI in the creative practice at this point. So students are very concerned, like, how much can I, like I can use AI in my portfolio? Like, can I use, AI, and how much I have to expose, like how much I have to say about AI, right? So I guess that's in the process of determining, like how we can use AI ethically in the creative process as a whole, as a, not just us, but the entire world. I think we're kind of figuring it out. Um, and then other than that, I think AI also, help students to be more critical about, their work process, because, when they try to use AI in their process, putting some words, oh, that's not what I wanted, then they kind of like, they really try to think like what I really want, and how I can adapt a certain part from the AI system, and how other parts, can be, like improved and revised by myself. So like students become more critical about the result from the AI, and they utilize those outcomes in their practices more with a critical view. So I think it's helping in a way, as a whole, but it's still very slow. And then we're still figuring out what's the best practice in AI.
Yep, thank you. Okay, Richard had a follow-up question for Nandini. Was the virtual studio in India directly based on a real studio?
Yeah, this is both yes and no. So last year I visited India to both Mumbai and Hyderabad to be able to go to these places physically and talk to the studio managers, the creative directors, and also there was this place called the Image Center. That's kind of the hub for entertainment and graphics in Hyderabad. So I was able to kind of collect some pictures and take notes as well. And like all the characters that you see here, the studio placements, like how they have these dailies room. So they were all based on real life studios. So not just one, but kind of a generic model of how studios look like. And also like going back to that previous question about talking of anxiety and VR technology. So usually there is this debriefing called the Tyagi debrief, where people are kind of introduced to a scenario. This could be just two actors acting, or it could be live video, live action video, and then talking about the scenarios, but making it more virtual. Now it's about the student taking more agency and exploring the spaces. They can spend some time just looking at the different cultural artifacts, asking questions to each other. So I think the VR space, really like using game engines, provides more agency for students to take their own time in absorbing all those cultural information, the sensory, the nuances of how people communicate and talk with each other. So I feel like the VR pre-departure module has a lot of benefits in reducing anxiety and making students more confident about their foreign trip. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, pausing a moment for any more questions from chat. Okay, while waiting for other questions, one thought on exploring like the culture of the local culture of any of these sites. Whenever you get to conversation with people, were the conversations for the avatars pre-recorded, or might there be different ways to make those conversations more lifelike and just have the ability to sort of be more free roaming, maybe even taking a page from the previous presentation, AI generated as well?
Yeah, so right now we made it scripted because we're just collecting our pilot data. So we need to see some, we need some variables that we can measure. So it's all pre-scripted, but we have been experimenting with some AI generated NPCs and, these non-player characters that are like you just ask. We did some testing. It is fascinating to see how they respond. I think we used Conva AI and in-world AI to just provide some background on what each character is. Like, okay, this is this game dev programmer who has 5 years of experience using Maya and Unreal or Unity, who's really passionate about these things. And the AI character just starts talking about games and passion. The testing was very fruitful. Like, there's so many directions that research can take by making it more AI driven. So that's going to be our next phase. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, I'll throw out another follow-up question related to AI. So in the explorations with the AI generative tools, did students make any observations or generalizations on ways to structure their natural language prompts as they were interacting with these different generative systems?
Yes, I guess I'll start. So one of the teams I didn't talk about, they had a hedgehog who was their main character, and they wanted to get fun facts about their hedgehog character. That was basically their game was fire safety in parks, and this hedgehog character was going around and had to do put out fires or do other things for fire safety. And if they didn't do it in time, everything's on fire because it's dry. But the AI had a real problem with an anthropomorphized hedgehog, and so it just kept like asking, like the results were like, but like why is this thing like why can this hedgehog talk? Like why would it say anything? And so they had to really change how they were asking it to look at this. So then finally it was like, well, let's just get hedgehog facts because the AI cannot deal with an anthropomorphized hedgehog. So that was something that was an issue.
I think definitely, depending on the tool, like there's so many guidelines out there now for the most popular tools for prompt engineering best practices for that one. And there's general guidelines as well. So I think, especially if you go back and look into those students' prompts, you'll see a lot of the similar like cinematic, 4K. Sometimes they'll recommend like using certain rendering engines for like photoreal images for some reason. Most likely because of those are image tags that were on things it was trained off of that gave realistic results. But I think one of the things that was definitely noticed by a lot of teams that were trying out different tools was the ability to stitch and bash things together and not just go straight for a result. Because obviously, like with generative fill from like Adobe, the nice thing is you can use like in painting techniques with this generative fill where you can be like, I don't like this part, I'm going to replace it with this, right? Instead of trying to create everything from scratch and fix just one aspect of it. So I think a lot of it was just learning from a lot of students that they just needed to be familiar with kind of like a lot of 3D tools. Is like, this tool is really good at doing this thing, but not great at doing this thing. And this other one's really good at these kinds of things, but not these things. And then just trying to, even like cobble those together to try to get the targets that they were looking for.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, question from Nandini. What were some of the students' reactions to image composition using text prompts? In the past, our students found that to be the most problematic area of using AI tools in their workflow.
Yeah, I'd say like from what I've observed, looking at the stuff that students come up with, I don't know if a lot of students were discussing specifically composition, though that's important for them for sure to like kind of have that analysis phase. But something that again, it kind of comes back to, I think, that idea of they have a tendency, like the tools, depending on the prompts they're using, wants to have like a very similar kind of composition, or it tends to lean towards a certain look. Especially when it came to lighting, I think that was still something that was a little challenging, was to get varieties of lighting scenarios. When you go for cinematic or filmic, they tend to kind of look like it could be in a film, but it's like a very specific looking kind of genre of film. So I think that was, again, something where it kind of came up to broadening how they're generating these things and using multiple tools or multiple processes to overcome some of the shortcomings of like DALL-E or Midjourney or whatever tool they were primarily using for most of their stuff. But yeah, I definitely remember specifically with Midjourney that a lot of the film looks tend to start to kind of be a little generic in terms of similarities to each other. So encouraging students to go outside of that box and start looking, okay, now let's pull back in actual real film looks, and let's find some references from movies and or maybe other tools that you guys can use.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Okay, Richard Thompson has another comment. The Texas A&M team seems to, similar to referencing traditional film for lighting and style. Only students are seeing their own creations in that lighting and style before working on that part of the productions.
Yeah, I think that's kind of how we tried to encourage the students to see it too, as part of that working process. But just like the last comment, that it did have like limitations. So there's a lot of tools that students were wishing that existed out there, which might be in beta, or there might be tools we're just not familiar with. But students were already thinking like, oh, it'd be great if I can upload these stills from these movies, and then they can give me back like a white box or grayscaled scene, and then just show me what it could look like lit like that scene. So it was interesting hearing students kind of come up with some of those ideas. But definitely, I think that was one of the nice aspects of this, is students getting to visualize what their project could look like if it was finished in X amount of weeks. Yeah. Oh, I was going to mention, sorry. One of them was Wonder Studio, was interesting because it's one where you can take film footage and then you can take a 3D model and upload both of them, and then it will track and add and comp your 3D model and light it into that comp footage, which we were kind of brainstorming ideas of doing that with students, where students can go out and do like real world shooting footage, or setting a stage with like real world lights, putting their character model in there, maybe even doing some mocap style, like acting out their character, and seeing what that can give them, because it spits back out to you like a 3D camera. It also sits animated lights with your character in it. So I think that could be another way of using other skill sets or other techniques for students to visualize what their final project could look like after X amount of weeks, because that 3D production development stage can take a long time. So it's hard to see the fruits of your labor at the beginning.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Okay, pause a moment. I think we may be winding down. It's about 12:50, which I think is the time we're scheduled to wrap up. So thank you to our panelists, Mayet, Jinsil, Caleb, Emily, and Nandini. And Nick has rejoined us to continue the program. Thank you,
I have been summoned. This was just yet another amazing session. Thank you all for your contributions, and looking forward to seeing how all of these things develop as you guys move forward. So William, thank you for hosting. A fantastic job. And so we have another academic session coming up in about 10 minutes. I will pause the recording so we can take a break.